I'm Sara Drakely Hall. I'm the CTO at MobileCoin, and I'm very excited today to be speaking with Faisal Saeed Al Mutar. Faisal, can you tell us about Ideas Beyond Borders and your mission and why you started this organization?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking to you. My name is Faisal. I'm originally from Iraq. I'm the founder and president of Ideas Beyond Borders. And its mission is making knowledge accessible in closed and oppressive societies. So we focus on a lot of areas with heavy censorship, authoritarian regimes, and difficulty of getting information into. There is a research which we kind of rely a lot on from the United Nations that says there are more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years, which is from the Arabic Development Report. And it talks about how much of the information available in different languages and cultural exchange between other cultures compared to some of the countries where there is heavy surveillance and repression. And that was kind of the inspiration behind the organization, as somebody who grew up in one of those oppressive societies and ended up here as a refugee in the United States in 2013.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience growing up? Because I think that's a really crisp example of where you were having a kind of dualistic experience of information. And I'd love to hear more about how you describe the ways in which your reality was shaped and how information helped change how you saw the reality.
Sure. So I grew up. My early childhood was under the regime of Saddam Hussein, and the closest, I guess, book description of that is 1984 by George Orwell, in which the most of the information was centralized. There were two TV channels, one owned by the president himself, another one is by his son, and so any possession of satellite television or even radio that can access signals from outside the country was banned, and in some cases punishable by at least a decade in jail, if not death penalty. So any form of kind of accessibility to the outside world was pretty much censored. To give you an example about how kind of the information anecdote that I like is in 2005, and that was kind of after the war and the removal of the regime. I was watching I think it was the National Geographic YouTube video, and I saw they were talking about the first Iraq war, the one in 1991. And I saw there was Iraq invasion of Kuwait, and then U.S. and the military pushback, and I was shocked. I was like, "What is this? Is this really what happened?" Because that was the complete opposite at what we were taught in schools, in television, all forms of information. We were taught that Iraq was invaded by Israel and other 33 countries, and then Iraq pushed back, and Iraq won that war. And then when I saw the video after 2005, after the war, it was a completely different story. And I was talking to my family, and then my friends and their parents are like, "What's this? Like, is this real? Is that really what happened?" And those who were elderly were like, "Yes, this is actually what happened, but we didn't want to tell you, because if you told you, but all of you guys are loudmouths, you would have told everybody, and then the intelligence would know, and all of us would disappear."
Okay.
So this is like the ecosystem that I grew up in. And then after that, in 2003, that's following the second war, Iraq kind of transitioned from that kind of 1984 style to like a semi-decentralized information space in which like every TV channel and every radio was owned by a different militia and different political party. So the way that the information became kind of sometimes called balkanized, in which you can go to a specific province and they have a complete different version of reality than the other one, as the people were not really kind of able to quickly adapt to that kind of freedom that came afterwards. So it was still almost difficult and impossible to know what the truth is. So that was the kind of the ecosystem that I grew up in, and which when I started like Ideas Beyond Borders, one of the kind of I would say like parallel mission that we have is not just about making information accessible, but advanced critical thinking skills. So in that way, people are able to differentiate between fact and fiction and all of that kind of polarized environment of information that people there grew up in, and many of these repressive regimes like to keep, so in that way they can control the masses.
One of the things I'm very fascinated in from the technological perspective and how this ends up supporting information distribution is peer-to-peer networks and peer-to-peer delivery of information. And I'm very curious how you have seen that show up in your work. And when information is delivered peer-to-peer, is there a different trust element around it? Is there, does it help to aid that critical thinking skills when, on the one hand, you have evidence-based information, say from scientific journals, and you have peer-to-peer information, and building that trust where you feel like you can share information peer-to-peer?
Definitely. So one of the kind of, I would say, a theme about many oppressive societies, and I was grilling a lot actually over the past couple of weeks with what's happening with Iran and other places, is that there is a very, I mean, it's hard to kind of explain, but like data-wise, out of one out of six adults is in the intelligence services. So one of the things that repressive regimes do very well is that they destroy the trust among society. So many people are afraid, sometimes afraid of their own best friends, are afraid of because they might think that the government is trying to, this person is an implant and this person is trying to report on you. So the element of trust is really important. And as a result, many people don't trust in kind of the mainstream ways of sending money, like Western Union or MoneyGram and some others who are kind of more institutionalized, when people actually ask for your ID, and many people are afraid of giving their ID, especially if they were doing work that be considered and anti-regime, even though this kind of line is very blurry, in which it depends on the mood of the president of the day. This can consider this work to be anti-regime, this one is not. Sometimes even an article about saying that women have a right to vote can end up being viewed as an anti-regime sentiment, even though there's no kind of direct attack on the regime itself. So the peer-to-peer networks and kind of the element of trust is in fact half of my job. Like when we recruit like people to work in translators for us and in some of those areas, especially like when in Afghanistan, rightly when we start to expand, really half of the job of half the HR work was about building trust between us and many of the translators we work with and the content creators we work with. Because at the beginning, their first kind of instinct was like, why is this person part of the other side? And there were any kind of question that can be considered personal, like, oh, which province do you live in? And it kind of was like, so we had to actually train ourselves to not ask any of these questions until later on in the conversation when we actually move into signing them into a contract and work with them. So the kind of the peer, obviously there's still a human element needs to be worked out, but these technologies definitely play in creating that trust and rely less on the mainstream kind of institutional ways of getting things. To give you an example, that actually happened with a partner organization of ours, is they had a translator who was working a lot on the subject of freedom of speech, and I believe he was translating some of the works of George Stuart Mill, etc. on that subject. And the partner organization, which is the reason I get to know them actually later on, they used the Western Union method. They told them, oh, go to this we paid you in Western Union, and then that person went to the store. And the person in Western Union is kind of decentralized. They give permission to stores to give that. And then that person who worked at Western Union or affiliated who gave that money reported that person to the intelligence. He's like, oh, this person received money from the United States and he must be kind of on the, and then within days, that person was interrogated and things like that. So as a result, like this kind of systems, let's call them the kind of the parallel technologically advanced systems that MobileCoin is creating and others really help in save on. I'll say when I was introduced to that technology, I think it's a technology that saves lives. It's not just about the usual transaction piece of it.
Yeah, and for those less familiar with how MobileCoin works under the hood, this is something I'm very excited to chat about and how it's able to achieve these features that you're talking about. Of we're using a blockchain, we're a layer one blockchain, and that the key feature that gets us is the ability to send payments cross-border. And so that's very important to us. And then we've also added, so many blockchains are not private, they're completely public. You go in to buy your coffee, the barista, the people behind you in line, anyone who's watching who knows your public address on the blockchain and knows the public address of the store now knows your real-time location. And so public blockchains, our hypothesis is that there's no way that they'll end up being used for payments. And so we think that this end-to-end encryption property and the privacy that we've built into our blockchain is absolutely critical for payments. And then when we're talking about the use cases that you have, where you're needing to pay people in your network, it's an extremely good fit for the blockchain that MobileCoin has built. And I'd love to hear more about kind of the experiences you've had with payments. And I know we've talked about the Hawala network before, and I'd love for you to kind of describe how does that work? What is it like in more cash-based societies? And what does it look like to start to move towards more digital payments? And kind of what's your vision there?
Sure. So generally, like the money kind of import and export within many of these societies rely on two elements. One major one is actually how many of these things used are between people who live in these countries and their families who live overseas. So yeah, they could be somebody who's a Lebanese, but his parents live in the United States or Canada, and then they send money to them. And then the other community that's kind of needs, which focuses a lot on the privacy space, is the ones that are working within the kind of the human rights space and political opposition, etc. So generally how things are, I mean, if someone is kind of things on the safe side of things, let's call them the ones in which people are just sending money regularly, they use what's called the Hawala system, which just means translates to transfer. That's the Arabic word for transfer. And so how it generally works is that there is a group of kind of trusted individuals. Depends on how kind of the repressive the society is. Like in Afghanistan, places like Afghanistan, there is probably like 6 degrees of separation between the person sending the money to the person receiving it, and it goes through multiple folks, and then all of these folks kind of trust each other, which makes the system not very scalable and sometimes scary, because in a way is that you're relying on kind of 6 different individuals who some of them might even get caught in the middle, and then the whole system kind of falls apart. However, it's resilient because there's a lot of people, because it's a money making business. So like there are a lot of people who work in it. So even if one system falls, there's another one that comes in later. However, it's so much reliant on humans, and it's so much reliant on the element of trust. So, and then there is the kind of the other one, which human rights kind of groups they use, which is less. It has less people in between, and it relies in kind of in strange way. It actually relies on people flying in and out of many of these places. So in that way, it's like so that relies on kind of less third party folks and more. It's like, especially like, for example, in countries like Egypt. Egypt recently has banned civil society groups for the most part. Like 90% of the civil society groups have been banned. Any groups that advocate for democratic norms and democratic reforms pretty much have been stopped. So they utilize a lot of if the donor, let's say, is in Germany, and then there is one of those civil society members lives in Germany, and then he knows his cousin who's flying back to Egypt tomorrow, then you give that money to that person who you trusted him will actually fly to Egypt and then go to the activists and give them the money. Both of these systems like rely a lot on humans. So when we try to explore more about how, if there is other ways in which that can happen, and when you mentioned the coffee example, that's my first conversation with Brady Forrest, and when I heard first about technology, I was like, this is not a technology that is about buying coffee for me. It's something that's far beyond that, and mainly as I'm in the human rights space. This is like about really their life and death if they get caught with if one of these systems that are around fail. So I'm really excited that it works. We actually have tested it with a couple of our translators, our team, and I'm really happy to see that kind of the technology is evolving and allowing kind of the EUSD part, which can be easily transferred into local currency, as some of the people there live paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have kind of the ability of utilizing kind of the crypto model 24/7, but they also use it as a savings account. I mean, some of the activists and others who don't necessarily live in the kind of the poorest of places, they think of that as their own way to save money, because there's no opportunity to invest in stocks or index funds and things like that within these places. So this is a way for them to kind of build a safety net in which they can invest in some of these in MobileCoin and other cryptocurrencies, for them to be able to, if one day they have the ability to travel or leave their country, they can transfer it in the currency outside, and then they can continue their lives.
One thing I would really love to hear your thoughts on as well is because talking about using it as a savings account and the opportunity for growth in your assets is one of the things that cryptocurrency has the potential for. And there's also the danger with the volatility. And so we know there's been a rise in demand for stable coins. And we actually just launched a stable coin on our platform called Electronic Dollars that is has the same properties of MobileCoin. It's fully encrypted. And I would love to hear your thoughts on where you've seen the need for stability in currency and where there might be a real need for encrypted stable dollars potentially, or whether, for example, I think there's an example in Lebanon where there's a need for a stable dollar. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I mean, on the subject of volatility, what's interesting about many of the areas that we work in is that they are in a way used to volatility with their own local currency. So Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, over the past 3 to 4 years, I think their currency. I lived in Lebanon for a year back when I studied English, and the US dollar was about 1,500 liras, and now I think it's about 50,000 liras, and that's if you can get it at in black market, not even the regulated central bank. So in a way, people in many of these countries are very comfortable with volatility. So volatility is not sometimes let's say the reason why they reject the MobileCoin or other currencies. However, the main thing that that people need, which we have tried to do in actually some of our campaigns that we worked on with MobileCoin, which we call the Freedom Technology Campaign, in first of getting people familiar with these technologies. One of the things is that people, like many of these areas, people are not familiar with that technology. So they know the local currency, they know the dollar, they know the euro for the most part. Now some countries know the yen and some other currencies, but that's what they are familiar with. So in order for mass adoption of this currency, mass adaptation of these currencies, is to make it familiar and use terms that they are more familiar with than others, which is I think why kind of educational campaigns and really getting people to know it will be very essential for them to use them. And the other piece, which back kind of the human rights space that I mostly familiar with, is that when these currencies kind of reach mass usage, then it will be very difficult for governments to single out people who use these currencies. One of the issues with kind of activists, and that was what we did with Signal significantly. Like generally speaking, at the beginning of kind of Signal rise within the media region, it was mostly associated with activists. And it was so when you are in the airport in whatever of these countries and they see that there's a Signal app in your account, immediately red flag. This person has a Signal, and that means they're an activist and they want to overthrow the regime. And then what we did is that we actually made educational campaigns to make Signal be used by everybody, which is like, this is good for you. WhatsApp is stealing your data, or not the safest ways to communicate. We even like use examples, cultural examples, in which people start them to value privacy. So then we start pushing more to Signal's mass usage. And that would be, I think, the best way to actually save the activists, because if these kind of technologies are only associated with the human rights activism or political dissent, etc., then it will be very easy for the governments to know that this thing, because they look at patterns, right? They're like, okay, this every kind of political dissident we arrested has a Signal app in their account, and therefore Signal is that. And the same thing with cryptocurrencies, and I think that as I said, like the volatility piece is not necessarily the biggest angle there. I would say that maybe like one of the biggest is the exchange piece. Is that if many of these exchanges, and there are some I see now working in the region, like OKEX, Rain, etc., and people can see like immediate results in which they can convert it to a local currency for them to pay the rent or use it to buy food, etc. And they see kind of the direct element of it. Then I think that will be very available in these countries.
Yeah, absolutely. The strategy of first needing to get the conversion points and then needing a base economy where there's value, there's easy value transfer and easy ways to get goods and services, and it's part of the base economy is very, very important. And that needs to be very specific to every region you're going into. And that's something where I think it's really wonderful to be able to understand the needs in the different geographies that have needs for private payments. And what you mentioned about the educational campaigns that you're doing and the Freedom Technologies campaign, that was wildly successful. And we were really, really proud of that collaboration and the videos that IBB made to educate about what cryptocurrency is, what are payments, and what's privacy and payments mean. I think they got several million views, even up into the tens of millions on some of them. And so I think that really demonstrates the need for this information and how people are really hungry for ways to solve the really day-to-day problems, and like you said, life and death problems around information, around payments. And you also mentioned Signal activations and how the education has been really helping to drive people being able to use Signal just for everyday conversations. And I'd love to hear how you've seen kind of the reaction to different events. Does that end up spiking activations? Does that end up spiking interest in the educational campaigns? How do you see people reacting to the educational campaigns that you're putting out there?
The response have been amazing. I was sort of, we were aiming for like, okay, if it has 250,000 view, we'd call that a success. And some of them like reached 2.5 million. And mainly these are the videos about what's cryptocurrencies and how to use, how to actually activate the wallets on Signal. These were like some of actually most successful videos that we had there. The interaction was again from both of the communities. One, the kind of the people who have families outside, or because even like with refugees, I mean, generally like we have the picture of the family of refugees in which all of them you see immigrating, but in many cases it is just one or two members of the family end up leaving, and then the others are being processed. So as a result, that kind of the need for these technologies, especially the ease of it, which I kind of love with the technologies you guys created, in which is you don't really need to be a technology expert to know how to open a wallet, send money, receive money, etc. The more easier and kind of more familiar people are with some of these, the easier it is for people to use them. So I'm very kind of, as I said, like very optimistic about this technology. I think that we need to expand. There's as in terms knowing that there is a demand. When it comes to the event, I mean, the events help a lot. That's why like we sometimes try to capture some of the trends, because when some of these events happen, that kind of spark people to look for these technologies immediately. And that's where even now with both Afghanistan and Iran, when the Taliban recently banned a lot of the websites that, including educational websites on the Afghanistan internet, we try to immediately, as people are searching for these, it's like, how can I browse the internet safely? We immediately start capturing that kind of the keywords that many people are using and advertise towards them. And so ideally, I mean, what I try to advocate for, and there is kind of multiple people within the human rights groups try to focus differently. I'm more on the preemptive side of things, is that because generally by the time when things are kind of exploding, many of these repressive regimes have done their background research and they know these are the apps they need to ban. So when actually things are needed, when these technologies are needed, by the time most of these governments have a preemptively thought that okay, when these things are happening, we're going to block them immediately. So even with Iran and some other places, and now there's a lot of spike with Signal, it is actually much harder to download Signal now in Iran than it was a year ago, because now the government is familiar with it. They block many of the links, even like with the mirror websites that people can just download the file, I think the APK file. They have blocked many of them. They have done their research about where activist groups actually upload apps like Signal. So I'm generally, even though this is not the kind of the sexiest in terms of human rights activism, in terms of preemptively trying to make people think about what would happen a year from now, even when things are not really exciting. So we try to do some of our work before these protests happening, even though they help a lot in the spike and the interest of people in these technologies. But it definitely makes it. And what also sometimes happen, and it happened, I think, in Afghanistan, the recent ban with the internet, is that the Taliban and others have created fake apps that kind of look exactly like some of those apps. And I mean, there was this funny example, I think, when Elon Musk recommended Signal, and there are people buying on Robinhood Signal on because it matches the name. It is very similar in this situation. There was this like website popped out of nowhere in which, oh, download this privacy app that protects you. It's called Signal, and many people like went into it, but it was just like either a fake app or it was a way for them to capture information about who's actually looking um, for this app. So I think I'm more, even though the protests and stuff and the news help a lot in driving people towards something, these are the times where sometimes it's kind of too late to actually intervene. And I'm more advocate for that, which is why like in our educational in our campaign, the Free Technologies campaign with MobileCoin, we were it was not related to trends. We were just trying to push it as much as possible, get people prepared that when things are difficult, they actually have the Signal installed in their app. They have the mobile coin wallet opened, and so when things are needed, these are actually people like human rights groups and others that we can actually support when things are difficult over there, and we can support them.
And I know we're closing on time soon, and one aspect of the work that you're doing that I really want to highlight that's extremely important to me, because my education, my ability to learn how to code, how to be an engineer, and my status as a woman, I am so moved by the work you are doing to help educate women. And I know you have right now an underground schools initiative in Afghanistan, and I'd love to just close hearing a little bit about that initiative and how people can help.
Sure. Since the fall of Kabul in August last year, we have been contacted by many of the teachers, and actually female teachers, in which for the first time in their life they were able to go to school during the 20-year period where they were able to, and they were like, okay, we have now that privilege. We received education, and we are seeing all of those girls not having education. We would like to make it happen for them. So they took it upon themselves to launch these underground schools, relying a lot of trusted network between parents and others for these girls to be able to continue the education and that they otherwise be denied by the current government, and figure out a way. Some of the schools are vocational, so they teach them skill sets, including coding in some advanced underground schools, and some teach them on day-to-day stuff like graphic design, translation, etc., so they can get the skill sets in which they can operate within the global economy and be able to offer their services on the internet, even though in some cases they cannot leave the house. So many of the schools, many of these teachers reached out to us, and it was really hard for us to say. I was like, this is what this organization is about. These are the type of people that we exactly need to support. And I'm very happy that As of now, we have supported about 20 schools all across Afghanistan, which we supported them pretty much on monthly basis. And even demand is higher. I mean, we have been reached out by many of these teachers, and we're hoping that with anyone who wants to support that, we actually can support more of those girls and more of those teachers. So thank you so much. It's one of the, I think when I get these messages from some of these teachers thanking me, I'm like, don't thank me, thank you. I thank you because you're the one taking most of the risk in making this happen, and I'm hoping that will elevate them from where they are right now.
Thank you so much, Faisal. And thank you for all the work you're doing. And I encourage everyone listening, go check out Ideas Beyond Borders and see